Hello everyone, and welcome back to JAS Reviews. My name is James, and on this channel I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please be sure to give this video a like, and to subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. And, well, happy Halloween, everyone. I am very excited for this holiday, as I always am, and one of my favorite parts of it is that I always get to make some sort of fun video on this day to celebrate the holiday itself, and either talk about some of my favorite pieces of horror media, or some of my favorite pieces of horror music. Now, I usually more focus on the movie side of things, and that is going to be the case once again this year. In fact, I think this year is going to start a new tradition for me as to what I do every Halloween, and that is that I will watch every single movie of a particular iconic horror franchise brand, and I will rank them from worst to best. And this year, I am going to be starting with what is debatably the one considered to be the most iconic, and that is the Halloween franchise, which just ended last year, so it's definitely one that is still very much so fresh in people's minds. And I figured it'd be very relevant to talk about, as people are still talking about how the Halloween franchise ended with Halloween Ends even today. And yeah, that's one I'm going to be talking about today, along with all the other 13 movies that are in this crazy long franchise that maybe should have debatably ended at a certain movie, but still ended up going on. And I'll sort of talk about my problems with that, as well as some of the benefits to it, as this franchise has certainly produced some truly bad movies, some that are what I would consider to be some of the worst horror movies I've ever seen, but it has also produced some really great ones, including some that I would consider to be among the best and most creative horror films I've ever seen. So yeah, without further ado, let's not waste any more time. Let's talk about the Halloween franchise, appropriately on October 31st, Halloween Day. And let's get started with what I think is the worst movie in this franchise. So, starting out at number 13, we have what is undoubtedly, in my opinion, the worst of the Halloween movies, and that is Halloween Resurrection. I mean, wow, it's actually incredible how awful this movie is. You know, maybe I was originally too mean to Halloween Ends when I reviewed it. I will say that I'm not a huge fan of Halloween Ends, and you will see where that one ranks a little bit later on down the road in this video. But after seeing this one, I do think I was a little mean to that one. I mean, at least that movie tries to give a somewhat definitive end to Michael Myers, and it respects Laurie Strode as a character, which I cannot say that this movie does either of those things. I could barely even stomach watching the rest of this movie after the cold open beginning that left a very bad taste in my mouth for how it treated one of the best final girls in horror movie history. They have to justify and add on so much in order for this movie to even make sense at all. And by the way, there will be spoilers for all of the Halloween movies here, so if you haven't seen them, then just know that. So if you haven't seen them, then I'd advise to click off now. But in H2O Resurrection, they pretty definitively killed off Michael Myers. I mean, Laurie chopped off his head with an axe. So the fact that they retcon it in the most stupid way possible here by saying that there were, like, multiple Michaels in the building or something like that, or that Michael sort of got one of the cops to wear his mask. It was so utterly convoluted and ridiculous. The movie was trying its best to justify itself, but it doesn't work at all. And the rest of the movie doesn't fare much better either. It feels like a zombie walking the whole time, constantly trying to justify its existence while feeling tired and worn out. I will give the movie one thing, though. Its premise has some potential. People exploring Michael's house in a reality TV style is mildly intriguing, along with having an audience that is watching the show react in real time. But nothing truly is done with it, nothing truly interesting is done with it, and the movie is still bad. I mean, undeniably. No one talks like a real person here, save for our main character, but our main character has the crime of just being very boring. And then there's Katie Sackhoff's character, who is probably the worst one here. I was so irritated by her performance. It felt like she was constantly talking through her teeth, and her performance felt very forced to me. Believe it or not, out of all the people here, Busta Rhymes might be the best performance in this movie. And his isn't even that great either. It's so cartoonish and cheesy, and his lines are just so ridiculous and feel like something out of a B movie. He roundhouse kicks Michael in a part of the movie, which I guess is mildly entertaining. And speaking of Michael, he might even be the worst here out of everyone, which is very disappointing to say. He's not at all an interesting killer, and he's not remotely intimidating, in my opinion. What's most fascinating about this movie is that it has the gall to moralize at the end of the movie thematically about how people should stop putting Michael Myers on camera for entertainment value. As if that isn't what this movie has been doing the whole time it's been on. I do think that most of the Halloween sequels are unnecessary, but at least they don't try to shoehorn in a message this forced. I will give them that much. And to be honest, I can understand why people would have wanted the Halloween franchise rebooted after this one. I mean, it was an absolutely insulting way to end it off. And for quite a few years, this was where the franchise ended, with this horrible whimper of a note where every character was just incredibly lame, where one of the best final girls was disrespected and killed off in a very unceremonious way. I just don't blame people for wanting it to come back. But to be honest, if this franchise had stayed done at H2O, it probably would have been better off at the end of the day. But of course, as we all know, that did not happen. But undeniably, out of all the Halloween movies that released, this one is the worst, and easily one of the worst horror movies I've ever seen. Next, at number 12, is Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers. This came off Halloween 4, which I liked, and I'll talk about later. And I feel like it just sort of ruined everything that Halloween 4 had going for it. All the potential that it had, it sort of does nothing with. The biggest crime that this movie has is that it is just sort of boring and plotting. It feels like it goes on, and the movie isn't even that long at only about an hour and a half, but it still felt like I was checking the clock just to see how much longer we had in this movie. You've got characters that I liked from the fourth movie returning, but it doesn't do much with them either. And like I said, it doesn't take anything interesting with the premise of Halloween 4. I mean, at the end of Halloween 4, we'd seen that Jamie had supposedly killed her mother, but they sort of retconned that here, and that her mother is still alive, and that she's just sort of been put into an institution, but that she's not really been corrupted by Michael like the end of the fourth movie implied. And unfortunately, Jamie as a character is relegated to doing mainly nothing in the movie besides crying and being in a children's hospital for most of it. I think there could have been a sort of eerily fun feel to the movie if they had gone full on with what the fourth one was established and made Jamie as sadistic of a character as Michael was. But they don't really do that at all. They don't take that risk. They put her in a situation like how Laurie was in Halloween 2, except at least in Halloween 2 with the hospital, it was far more interesting, and it felt like Michael was constantly after her because they were in the hospital together. But in this one, Jamie and Michael barely see each other. I think this is the worst we see Dr. Loomis, his character, in at least the original run of the Halloween movies. He feels very out of character here. He's unnecessarily cruel to Jamie, who is just a child and who has been through some very traumatic events, but yet he treats her just awfully in this movie and is trying to force information out of her when clearly she's just in a bad state and can't always vocalize what she is feeling. It just feels very weird for him to do. He also just feels ridiculously dumb here. He makes some decisions that I don't think his character would have made in previous movies. He knows what Michael is like, and yet he goes out of his way to put himself in these stupid situations to where he could die to Michael. It's amazing that he survives in this movie somehow. And I just don't understand why he would do this when he has the deepest understanding of Michael out of any character in the movie. Michael's mask here is just at its worst. Believe it or not, a lot of what makes Michael menacing is his mask. His demeanor is certainly a part of it too, but his mask is a big part of what can make him menacing or not. And I feel like his mask is just at its worst here. He also just takes forever in a day to kill anyone. It feels like he is stalking forever. I know a part of his character is that he stalks people, and that can make him so intimidating, is when you feel like he's constantly behind you and he's going to get closer and closer. But in this movie, it feels like he takes forever to get to the point. there's this particular scene that takes place in a barn with three of the main teenage characters, all of whom are just awful characters. The fact that they center the movie around these teenagers in this movie is not great, because they're not very likable characters at all, and come across more as annoying than anything else. But there's this barn scene that, man, it feels like it takes forever to get to what it's doing. And even still, it feels incredibly boring and just like it's going for an unnecessarily long amount of time. Add on to that a lot of fake out jump scares and just not a very interesting plot overall that really goes nowhere and just ends in the same place where the fourth one was, with, oh, Michael's still around. And this movie feels very pointless and like it could have just been taken out of the franchise, and the franchise wouldn't have been any different for it, really. At number 11 is Halloween Kills, and man, I still feel disappointed whenever I think about this movie. This was coming off of the 2018 Halloween remake, which had so much excellent stuff going on in it, including the fact that it was finally just sort of only paying attention to what the first Halloween had established and not adding in all that other unnecessary lore that the other Halloween movies had done. But this movie sort of takes that and doesn't do anything with it. I think this one ruins a lot of the potential that Halloween 2018 had. All of the Strodes feel unimportant to here. Laurie is relocated to a hospital again, but unlike in Halloween 2, she is far less active in this one. There's stupid decision after stupid decision made by nearly every other character in here, which is a horror trope that I can't stand. And to me, this movie is on par with some lower tier horror movies. It just has a bigger name and a bigger budget attached to it. The main positive I can say about this movie is that Michael's mask is pretty cool, and they do a good job at making him menacing here. He does feel very powerful. To me, the nail in the coffin was the movie's ending, because Green, the director, tries to essentially understand Michael again, which feels like it's going against the point. Like the first movie says, there's no understanding Michael, that he's just a killer, and that's all he is, that's all he knows how to do. And this movie tries to establish some deep connection between him and Laurie again. But now they aren't even siblings, so it makes even less sense. Maybe they're connected by trauma or something, I don't know. The movie never really explains it, and I don't think the third movie really explains it either. It's just very frustrating that this movie tries to explain Michael again and explain why he's killing. It sort of tanks Halloween 2018 for me, even though I do still like this movie. You just have to consider it in context of the very disappointing sequels that came after it. At number 10 is Halloween Ends, which is the most recent Halloween movie we have. Now, while I still don't like this movie, I will say that I have a little bit more respect for it than when I first watched it. I get what it's going for. A lot of people have actually compared this one to Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, and how this one has a lot less to do with Michael and introduces a totally new character who is the main evil for most of the movie, because Michael sort of passes down his evil to him. And I get why people might think of it that way, that it is sort of like a Season of the Witch, because it does something totally different where Michael isn't in the movie for most of it. But I sort of disagree on that front, because the fact is that Michael still is in this movie, and he does become the focus of the end of the movie eventually when him and Laurie face down. So all that other stuff in the middle feels semi-pointless because that character does not survive, believe it or not. Also, Michael passing down his evil once again makes him more of a mystical entity than just a cold, dead killing machine, which is just something that I feel like, once again, we don't really need. I'm glad that they're not really doing the thing where Laurie feels a connection with him from Halloween Kills, but it still feels like something that's just unnecessary for Michael to do, in my opinion, and it just doesn't really add much to the movie at all. Nevertheless, there are a couple cool things in this movie too, I suppose. I think the final fight between Michael and Laurie is pretty cool, although I will say the one in H2O is better, and I think it's nice that the movie at least definitively ends Michael's story here, at least it seems to. You could debate that the very ending scene is a bit of a cliffhanger, but I sort of feel like it's not. And it does seem like, at least in context of this movie series, that Michael is actually dead. At the end of the day, the movie is very messy, and I think it wanted to be riskier than it was, but it still ended up playing it too safe because people just want Michael Myers at the end of the day, and that's what the movie is going to have to give them in order for it to do well. And the fact that it can't play it a little riskier is a shame, but it still speaks against this movie. It still makes it not work, and it makes the ending a little bit perplexing. At number 9, we have Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. I went into this one pretty worried because this one got heavily panned by everyone on Rotten Tomatoes, critics, and audiences alike. But I didn't really hate it. I just found this one to be pretty average. Although it is at least an interesting average, more than some other average movies that I see. It has some very weird choices that it makes, certainly with Michael, and it tries to add on more lore. I think this is where people were certainly starting to get tired of all the stuff that they were trying to do with Michael Myers. They make Michael have a child with his niece, Jamie, an incestuous child, which is just so utterly ridiculous. It doesn't seem like something that Michael would be interested in doing at all. I don't think he would want to have a kid. There's this whole cultish aspect of the movie where the people in Haddonfield are wanting to sacrifice the child because they think that will somehow put an end to Michael's evil. It's very convoluted, and I don't think the movie does a very good job at explaining it. And even the director admitted later on that he felt like even his director's cut, which was released later on, didn't do a very good job at explaining what he was going for. Now, I will say this movie has one big thing going for it. I think it has one of the more menacing and brutal versions of Michael, so that is a big plus. I also think there's a very strong atmosphere here. There are definitely many places that feel pretty horrific and tense, and Michael feels very cold and unfeeling here, which I think works well. I also think Loomis is much better here than he is in Halloween 5, and he turns in a pretty bittersweet final performance because he does pass away after this movie. I do think that, for as messy as it was, the cultish aspect of this movie was intriguing, with the whole town being involved in a conspiracy. It sort of makes sense to make Haddonfield sort of a character here, but they don't really do much with it. I also think at the end of the day, they just over-explain it, and it comes across as pretty stupid and laughable. I also just sort of hated the constant musical cues to indicate Michael's presence, when more subtlety would have paid off in dividends for this movie. So yeah, overall this one came out to just be a very mixed bag where there was as much I disliked as I somewhat enjoyed, and overall it just does feel like a somewhat unnecessary movie as well. It doesn't feel like it adds much despite trying to add a little bit of everything, and it just comes across as yet another not great movie in this franchise. Next up at number 8 is Halloween 2, the 2009 version directed by Rob Zombie. And after the first Halloween, this is not at all what I would have expected Rob Zombie to make. He tries to make a film that is much more, I don't know what the proper word for it would be, maybe artsy or indie, I guess. It's a very interesting direction to take it for sure. And I will give this movie one big positive, and I think it's actually a fairly big one as well in my opinion, is that the exploration of Laurie's trauma here is very well done, and I think it explores it here better than maybe potentially any other Halloween movie with Laurie does. I like that they don't make her a perfect victim either, as that is not how people who have dealt with trauma are. I think this movie also seems to understand Michael more, which I do think is a bit counterintuitive and definitely the weakest part of Rob Zombie's movies. The attempt to understand and humanize Michael a bit when, at the end of the day, he's still just a killer and inflicts so much pain on other people. It's a bold choice, though. I will give him that. No other movie tries to do that to Michael as much as he does, and I sort of appreciate him trying to take that risk, even if it doesn't really pan out as much. I also do have a problem with this, though. I think the movie makes Michael's motivation too similar to Jason Voorhees, and that he's spurned on by the spirit of his mother to kill other people. I don't think Michael necessarily needs that type of motivation, and there's also all this symbolic white horse stuff that I guess is trying to allude to the Book of Revelations and how Michael is enacting Armageddon because he wants to take his sister with him into the afterlife so that his family can be together again, but it just doesn't really work. in the way that I think the movie is wanting to. I will say, though, there is one pretty powerful scene in here with Brad Dourif as Sheriff Brackett, who turns in a great performance in both of the Rob Zombie Halloween movies, by the way. And it's when he reacts to his daughter being dead, and we see all these flashes of her childhood going through his mind through like video camera footage, and it's so heartbreaking to watch. And I think in this movie it takes seriously the idea of how much pain that Michael brings on people. Like, we can actually feel the trauma that these people are going through, and it makes the movie a lot darker. This might be the most grim Halloween movie, and the one that takes its victims the most seriously. I couldn't see myself ever returning to this one because it was a miserable experience, but also that was sort of part of its intent, and I think it got there, so it does work in that regard. But the ending is a little perplexing to me. I sort of get what they were trying to go for the ending, but it felt like too little too late at the end of the day. And at number 7 is the 2007 Halloween remake, once again directed by Rob Zombie. Now, I'll admit, I thought I was going to hate this movie because it seemed to go directly against the thesis of the first Halloween. The thesis of the first Halloween being that there is no understanding of Michael, that he is just pure evil. So to me, it seems like an awful idea to explore his childhood. But in some ways, in this movie, it actually works, and I think it is sort of interesting to see Michael as a somewhat carefree child who eventually gets lost in his own inner darkness. Nevertheless, there are a lot of parts of this movie that don't work. One of the ones I feel most conflicted about is Malcolm McDowell's portrayal of Loomis. It's very different from Donald Pleasance's portrayal, which I like. He portrays him more as an opportunist in a way, where he is wanting to take Michael's story and write a book about it and essentially get famous off it, and Halloween 2 takes this a step further by making him just a total egomaniac about it. I think it's interesting to portray Loomis in that way, and it does feel like very much so a way a modern interpretation of Loomis would be done, but I'm not sure it works as well as it could, and I'm not sure I like it as much as I would want to. It also feels a little bit messy. I will say, the biggest thing this movie has going for it is, in my opinion, this is the most intimidating looking version of Michael Myers we have ever gotten. He looks imposing. The person who plays Michael, I mean, he is built. He is tall and looks like a giant. You feel like this guy could easily crush anyone to a pulp if he wanted to, and he definitely does that in this one. I think the way the actor plays him is done very well. You can just feel the deadness behind his eyes, but most eerily, you can feel that he relishes in killing. This is the Michael that enjoys killing the most. He likes drawing it out, and it's pretty terrifying to watch, I will admit that. I also do think Scout Taylor Compton is great here and provides a fresh new take on Laurie. I liked her in the second Halloween of Rob Zombie's as well, and I like her Laurie. She may not be quite as good as Jamie Lee Curtis, but I like what she does with the character. I do think the movie becomes less interesting when it just becomes a remake of the original Halloween, but I will say that the climax of the movie is legitimately great and goes pretty extreme with the violence, and it works well. My biggest critique of this movie, besides the fact that I don't really think it works for the most part, that it tries to humanize Michael, is that it is a little too edgy for its own good, especially in the beginning half. I mean, it just seems like they're using curse words all the time just because they're wanting to say this isn't your grandpa's Halloween or whatever. But it's also trying to be both Michael and Laurie's story, and I think it becomes a little messy because of that. Next up at number 6 is Halloween 2 from 1981. And yeah, this was, of course, the first sequel I watched from Halloween a couple of years back, and I wasn't expecting to love it necessarily, but I did really like it, even more than I thought I would. Especially considering the fact that, believe it or not, this is the movie that introduces the plot line that Laurie is Michael's sister. And the movie tried to constantly dig its way out of that hole ever since. There is a lot of stuff in this movie that works very well. It is pretty tense. It takes full advantage of the hospital setting, crafting some scenes that genuinely made me hold my breath. Michael Myers is still a pretty frightening, inhuman presence and is by far the best of the iconic horror slashers to me here still. The POV shots of Myers here are pretty cool, even if it's not as effective as the ones done in the first film. And Jamie Lee Curtis is still good as Laurie in this. Of course, Donald Pleasance is excellent again as Dr. Loomis and the clear highlight. I like how he navigates his character here, and he feels pretty unpredictable. I think where my main problems lie is with the way the characters are treated somewhat. I do think that Laurie is not nearly as interesting here as she was in the first Halloween, and I hadn't realized, like I said, that the reveal of Michael being Laurie's sister came so early in the series. I thought this was stupid when I first heard that this plot twist would happen in the Halloween movies, and I don't think it works even in the context of this admittedly really good film. I think every other character in here that wasn't Laurie or Loomis acted really dumb and were pretty disposable kills, so it was hard to get attached to anyone. I do think that this movie is saved by some very well executed scares and a great setting, as well as a Michael that I find pretty intimidating. So yeah, I do think this is a pretty strong entry in the Halloween franchise, but there are some ones that are better than it. At number 5 is Halloween H2O 20 Years Later. And with this one, it's sort of interesting to think that the Halloween series could have come to an end here if it really wanted to, and in my opinion, it probably would have been better off for it. It mostly ignores all the other Halloween movies, with the exception of the first two, continuing to follow Laurie's story, and still holding on to the lore that Laurie is Michael's sister. So the confrontation here between her and Michael feels fated, rather than by chance. I also do think that Jamie Lee Curtis's performance here is excellent, and it may be my favorite out of any of her performances in the Halloween movies. Unfortunately, we do have some other side of things here, with Josh Hartnett not being great here and turning in a pretty silly performance. I also think his hairstyle is pretty bad, and it looks very distinctly late 90s to early 2000s, so it doesn't work at all. And yeah, this movie does feel very distinctly late 90s in a way that a lot of the other Halloween movies don't, and it does feel inspired by Scream, and that horror wasn't taken as seriously during this time as it used to be, and that can work to both this movie's benefit and to its detriment. I don't think Michael is quite as powerful feeling here as he was in earlier Halloween movies, like they maybe weaken him a little bit, but that does help make the final confrontation between him and Laurie feel a little more tangible at the same time. I think the writing of this movie is what helps lift it up more than anything else, and that it's centering its story on Laurie and really doing a good job of developing her character and getting her the courage to face against Michael. And man, that final confrontation between her and Michael is just great. I do think it's better than the final confrontation between her and Michael in Halloween Ends. It feels a lot more intense and a lot more active, just more happening. And when she does finally chop off Michael's head, it's a very satisfying moment, and the movie doesn't add anything after that. She just chops his head off, and the movie ends. And maybe that's where it should have ended. It felt like a very efficient way to end the series, and it was just satisfying to see the final girl that we'd come to like from the first two movies being the one to do it. At number 4 is the 2018 Halloween. And yeah, like I said, even though I don't like the other two in David Gordon Green's Halloween trilogy, I do think this movie works very well as a sequel to only the original Halloween movie. So this means it ignores every other Halloween movie. So Laurie and Michael are not related here. They're not siblings. It goes back to embracing the theme of the first movie, that sometimes evil doesn't have a reason for being evil. It just is that way. And I like that they go back to that idea. I also think it works for Laurie reclaiming her trauma here and her embracing her family rather than fear. It's an inspiring way for the movie to progress, and I like the family element that the movie has. It feels a lot more heartwarming in that way and a lot more unifying. I like that Laurie has something that she can really grasp onto and connect onto here more than potentially the other Halloween movies. Funnily enough, this movie really brings to mind The Force Awakens for me, in that a lot of the film has homages to the first Halloween, but it's done in a way that is respectful rather than just copying it. I also think that Andi Matichak as Laurie's granddaughter Allison is great, and I like how she sort of takes on the role that Laurie had in the first movie. It feels like poetry, sort of. It feels like repetition, and it works great. Michael is also, I think, pretty menacing here, and I like how brutal his kills are. They don't feel over the top, but they feel brutal enough to work. I also just think this movie has a great climax. I love that all the Strobes come together as a family to take down Michael in his home, and I think it has a good cliffhanger. Unfortunately, the movie doesn't do much with the cliffhanger, as you know, I feel, based on me talking about Halloween Kills, but I do still like it in context of this movie. And yeah, I will return back to this one fairly often because this is a really fun sort of requel to the original Halloween. At number 3 is Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. I'll admit I wasn't expecting to put this one this high, especially coming off of Season of the Witch, which I sort of liked for not being about Michael Myers at all. It felt like a nice change, but this one actually makes Michael Myers' return feel very exciting and well-earned. It just works here. First of all, the atmosphere in this movie is just off the charts excellent. I think this one might have the most clear fall and Halloween vibes out of any of the Halloween movies. Michael here feels consistently present and menacing, and I think this one might make him the closest to how he is in the first movie. I think Michael feels consistently present and menacing in this one, and they make him very much so like in the first movie, maybe even more so than Halloween 2 from 1981 did. I just really think Michael works well in this movie, and he's always active and always trying to kill. I feel like he's having a purpose in this movie at any point. I know that some people don't like his mask here and think it looks a little cheesy, but I actually think the addition of the eyebrows is sort of appropriately uncanny valley, and for me it at least increases the fear factor. It also helps that this movie has some of the most likable protagonists out of any of the Halloween films. I think Jamie, who is Laurie's daughter, and Laurie is dead in the context of this movie, or presumed dead, I should say. I think Jamie, her daughter, is very likable, and I think she works here just as well as Laurie does in her movies. I think Ellie Cornell is also quite good here as Rachel, and I like the way the relationship between her and Jamie develops. Jamie is not her actual sister, she's her foster sister, but she still feels a very sisterly protection towards Jamie, and I like the way that the two of them form their bond. I also think Donald Pleasance might give his best Loomis performance here. I really liked what he did here. I liked that he was much more cautious of Michael, more cautious than he's ever been, and that he actually goes out of his way to try to take down Michael several times in the movie. There is also, man, an ending here that really left my mouth hanging open because I was not expecting it. It was very chilling to see Jamie go and kill her mother and do a similar POV shot from the first movie. I thought, at first, oh no, Michael's back, of course he is, but then the movie pulls a twist that no, it was Jamie wearing the clown mask. And the movie had built up that this was going to happen because she had the clown costume on, much like a younger Michael did in the original Halloween. I also think this one treats the whole townspeople trying to take down Michael better than Halloween Kills does. There aren't as much morons here who are constantly going out of their way to make stupid decisions. There's actually a couple times where they hesitate and realize, maybe we shouldn't kill Michael in this way. I still think there are a couple points where they make some dumb decisions and where it doesn't work as much as I would want it to, but at least it's executed better than what is done in Halloween Kills. So yeah, overall, this was a very enjoyable Halloween movie, and definitely one I could see myself returning to. This might be a controversial one to put at number 2, given the fact that this one doesn't have Michael Myers in it at all, save for a brief TV sort of clip of him in the movie. And I know that a lot of people don't like this one, but I also know this one has gotten a critical reevaluation, and that is Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. This one takes a risk, and I actually think this one feels the most like a Carpenter movie too, but you can barely tell besides that this is a Halloween movie at all, besides the atmosphere, and I think that's actually a positive. I love the eerie, stripped-down soundtrack. I think it works for the movie's small-town atmosphere. The town feels much more like a character in this one. And I do think the casting is overall solid here, too. Tom Atkins is a pretty interesting and unconventional main character here. He feels like a genuine everyman, while also having some moments where he is an action star. Also, I think Stacey Nelkin as Ellie provides a really good sympathetic heart in the film. This movie is also unafraid to get weird, maybe the most out of left field weird that this movie series gets, with the small town vibe of like everyone if they wear these masks, they'll essentially get inducted into this cult-like atmosphere, and it's sort of a criticism of media deception and everything like that. It's all very strange. But I think it's all wrapped up in a distinctive atmosphere, beautiful visuals, and an intriguing plot. I do appreciate the decidedly dark ending here, too. This movie doesn't really do anything for the Michael Myers lore, and I think that's totally fine. In fact, I think it's refreshing for this one. And sometimes I sit back and wonder what the Halloween series would have been like if it had gone down this route of being more of an anthology series, where not everyone was about Michael. This one was not successful during its time, and I understand why. It had the Halloween name attached to it, and yet no mention of Michael besides that one TV clip. But I appreciate it for what it does. I actually like it better than most of the Halloween films here, obviously. Pretty much every other one except for one. I think it's an intriguing experiment that I'm glad I gave a chance. I wasn't sure what I was going to get out of this movie. I thought I might dislike it because of how different it was, but I actually really respected this one. There are points where it can get a little dull, sure, and there are points where it can get a little too silly to my liking, but still, I think this was a really great movie. And finally, at number 1, I mean, what else was it going to be but the original 1978 Halloween? I don't know how you couldn't rank this one at number 1, because it's just an iconic film. There aren't many like it out there. I still can't get enough of that excellent cold opening where we just see Michael wearing a mask as a child and his POV, and it's such a simple scene, but it's done so very well. John Carpenter's direction is confident and well-paced, and it lets the movie breathe when it needs to, and then become intense at the right moments. And for as much as I do think, for example, that Rob Zombie's Michael Myers might be the most imposing or brutal, or that even in The Curse of Michael Myers, they have a Michael that might be the most cold and unfeeling, I don't think any other Michael fills me with as much dread as the first Halloween Michael does. And that's simply because of how well they establish him. They just establish him as a shape, as not human at all. Just the embodiment of pure evil. Nothing more, nothing less. And you just feel that imposing evil through the movie and how you can only see him in the shadows for the most part. I think that just the established concept of Michael being a monster who kills, because that's all he knows how to do, is a chilling concept. There's no answer. There's no light at the end of the tunnel for what he is. And that is what makes him so horrific. And of course, we have the legendary final girl and Laurie Strode. Jamie Lee Curtis's performance here is great, and while I do think she has an even better performance in H2O, and you could even debate the 2018 Halloween, I still really like what she does here, and it's really admirable how well she plays this character and how much we can sympathize with her. Halloween is one of my top 10 favorite horror movies of all time. It's the one that started this franchise, and nothing else compares to it in the whole series. Nothing else matches up to what John Carpenter made here. It's easily the best, no question about it. So yeah, that was my ranking of the Halloween franchise from the worst to the absolute best, which, of course, the absolute best is a masterpiece. So what would your ranking of the Halloween movies be? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to see if you have some disagreements with me or if we are in agreement on some things, because I know people have vastly different opinions on these Halloween movies. So yeah, let me know. But once again, my name is James, and I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please leave this video a like and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. And happy Halloween, everyone.